Hey, welcome to the session. Feel free to drop any questions you have for us in the chat down the side. We'll just wait for a few moments to get started and wait for more people to join. If you've got any questions throughout the session, just drop them in as they arrive in your brain, and we'll hopefully be able to answer them as well. But there is also going to be a coffee shop afterwards where we can chat to anyone else afterwards who's got more questions. Maybe if we don't quite finish on time, this session will finish about 6 o'clock. But yeah, like I said, we'll be in the coffee shop afterwards. All right, should we get started then? So I'm Alex. I'm from University Radio York, where I've worked with the Students' Union there on a number of events from a presenting point of view, but also from an organisational point of view. And I'm joined by a number of panellists who have also been involved with a lot of events, either from an SU side or from a student media side. So we'll start with Seb. Do you want to introduce yourself and talk about what it is that you do at Leeds?
Okie dokie. So I've just graduated from Leeds Uni. I spent 3 years in the Student TV and Student Radio Societies. I was also the media representative for our student activities executive for my final year. So I was sort of in a sort of central point between Student Media Societies and the SU for quite a lot of events and collaborations that we did, coordinating those over the past year.
Fantastic. And Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Hannah. My background is in student media, is basically through spending more time at University Radio York's station than doing my degree, presenting, but also as their training coordinator and programme controller. At the moment, I'm University of York's Students' Union graduate events intern, so I help to coordinate all of the union's events from our summer ball, but also assist student groups in putting on their own events. So particularly student media and supporting everything that they put on throughout the year as well.
And of course, Hannah's just joined the SRA committee too as our events exec, and she's taking over from Dan. Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so I'm Dan. I was the head of events at Demon Media at Leicester in my final year of university. I then spent a year as Deputy Events Officer at the SRA, and then for the last 2 years, I've been the Events Executive at SRA, and I've headed up organisation of the Student Radio Awards and the Student Radio Conference for the last 3 years.
Fantastic. So everyone has a variety of backgrounds, either in student media or working with SUs themselves directly. Throughout all of that, obviously, there's a lot of work directly with students and making sure that they're involved in our events. So first of all, it's quite a natural starting point from the SU side, and we'll start with Hannah, obviously, as the events intern at UC this year. The most important thing for me when you're putting on events as an SU and you want to get student media involved is having that trust in students. How do you make sure that you have that trust, and what's a good way to start that working relationship?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's about setting up those kind of goals from the get-go. Having lots of meetings before you put on the event about what the student media need is a key one as well. Even down to how many plug sockets they need. It kind of saves all of that hassle on the night. And setting those goals and talking to them before, make sure that you're both on the same page about how you would like the event to run and what you can both gain from it as well. But yeah, trusting students. From my kind of experience, trusting students is the best thing you can do for an event. They add so much value to any event you put on, and it's just about talking to them and getting creative about something that they could provide that perhaps they haven't in the past.
Yeah, and Seb, you were one of those trusted students, I suppose, in your role at Leeds. And what sort of events do you think it's best for students to get involved with, Seb?
So I was thinking about this earlier on. I think just really students could really get involved in any event, because if an event's worth doing, there might be a student who's interested in it. One of the greatest things that I've loved about student media is the fact that it's made up of lots of different people who all have lots of different interests. So any event that's on, people might be interested in getting involved in. Some of the sort of in some way, shape or form, or covering it for the student media outlet, more getting involved in just anything that's sort of students are at the heart of, if that makes sense. And sort of anything like, so one of the big ones that we did at Leeds was we did a hustings around the general election. And that really worked because we had a group of us who were really interested in putting on a telly programme with a political debate and interested in journalism and all of that stuff. And then we had a student union who wanted to engage students in the general election in some way. And so that sort of worked quite nicely, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Dan, would you say that lines up with your experience at Leicester as well?
Yep, I'd say, honestly, I'd back up everything Seb's just said. It's, you say what kind of event should students get involved in? Everything. Every single thing they can.
Exactly, yeah. I mean,
and I think...
Go on,
sorry. I think that sort of helps with gaining that trust as well. The more that the two-way communication exists, the more trust there's always going to be. So even if it's just sort of a student TV station going to film some shots of a market fair or a clothes swap or something, then that sort of student TV station members seeing members of staff at the union or sort of coordinatory people at the union, and therefore building up a relationship. So then you do build up trust on both sides.
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously, I know from York, obviously, it was a case of we worked with USU from Freshers Festival all the way through to the end of year events with the SU elections, and that was a relationship. But by the time we got around to the SU elections where Freshen was on and we needed to produce a live broadcast, we already had that working relationship built up and the trust was already there to make sure that could work to its best potential. So from the student media side then, obviously all three of you have been involved with student media too, from the perspective of trying to work with the SU on events. Sometimes SUs can be maybe not as receptive to the idea of potentially getting students directly involved with events, and they might say, they don't know if necessarily student media has the right skill set to be able to fill in those gaps. Seb, you're someone at Leeds who sort of, over your time at Leeds, I think student media has got more and more involved with what the union were doing, to the point this year where they've been very involved with events, with online things during the coronavirus period of lockdown. How would you say you've managed to sort of enable that transition to being more involved in the SU?
I think it has just really helped with just sort of, it's no secret to anyone who knows me that I've spent a lot of time in the SU building over the past year. And so it's just sort of, again, just sort of having constant conversations with people so that sort of people do build up trust in you. And I think it is just all about trust, really. And sort of people sort of think more about the more things that student media does, the more sort of people, in my experience, the more people in SUs realise student media can do, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Dan, have you got anything to add there from your experience?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of student media organizations are they've got the advantage of already coming into the organization that has really good links with the student union and are going to be trusted almost immediately to do the bigger events and to cover almost everything. I think at Leicester, I kind of had that privilege of the SU had been working really closely with us for years. So anytime they wanted to do something, we were their first port of call to come we're going to pull off this event. Do you want to come and help us do coverage and stuff like that? But start small. It's, if you don't already have that link there, I can't make it any more clear than to say that you don't, there is no barrier here. You don't need to already have that link in place before you can start to work with the students' union. All you need to do is, most universities are going to have an activities coordinator and someone who's responsible for taking care of the student organizations. They're also going to be really tightly integrated with the SU and be involved in their events. They are your link. Get to know them, get chatting, make sure that you're starting small. If there's things like the Freshers Fair going on, get some footage for it, film it, put it up on the YouTube channel, and make sure that kind of the university see it and see that it's a benefit. Start small, and eventually you can start to weave your way in that when the university or when the students' union rather are pulling off these bigger events, you can say, hey, we've done this for you before. We've noticed you're pulling off this event. Is there a way for us to get involved? And it's just start building that trust up from little things, and you can work your way up to building that relationship and passing it on to like, year by year.
Fantastic. That's yeah, it's very true. And obviously, you could start with coverage and maybe helping out with that publicity aspect, and then move into actually running the events themselves, which is something that, yeah, we see at student media across the country. Hannah, obviously, you moved from student media to working actually in the SU. Was there anything that surprised you about that shift? And was there anything that you thought, oh, student media could be doing this, and they haven't been whilst I've been in it, whilst when you made that move?
Yeah, definitely. I think before I kind of came into the role, there was a bit of a distinction where it says, okay, well, we put on events as a student union and the media groups cover it. But actually, you can use the media groups as content at your events, which is something when I sat down and thought, right, I've got 2 stages. I don't have the time or the manpower to run both. Does URY want to run a stage? Their specialism is music. They've got loads of contacts, ones that I don't, through the local music scene. Let's get them in, give them a bit of production experience, let them run the sound, let them do all the engineering, own that stage. And actually I found that little acoustic stage kind of tucked in the corner just as popular as the main stage we'd paid thousands of pounds for artists to come and perform on. To some extent where it was busier than when the main stage was. So I think there's a massive advantage to getting students to run events for students, and the SU giving a platform to student media groups for those opportunities. I also saw, funnily enough, I'd put up like a Facebook event, as you always do through your SU events, and I'd found that student media groups were actually doing their own fringe Facebook events to say, come and see our acoustic stage, or here's our lineup, or whatever. And I found that amazing, really, because you're reaching a whole different group of students than you would just by trying to target those that like your student union page. So I cannot go on enough about the fact that student media, if you give them as much room to be creative as you can and is within your budget at an event, and just let them go for it. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong. But usually they're very good at pulling it off because they're competent and they do it all the time anyway with their own events and at their own stations.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the key there is just to involve them in as many things as possible and let that relationship flourish. So you've got that working relationship there. You've started working on events together. You're in the planning phase and you've got a big event coming up. Hannah, from your perspective, how much should SUs involve student media in necessarily the build-up and the planning of the event? How much consultation does there need to be? What does student media need to know?
Yeah, definitely. I think with our elections in particular, when it was quite an advanced technical setup, it was really useful to have those conversations right from the beginning, because it's a traditional event. Everyone knows what it's going to look like. I need to know what you guys need. And that was really simple. But when you start building a new event up from the ground, I find it really helpful as well to have those brainstorm sessions with students as well, because I don't particularly know what students want. Even being removed from student life for just a year, that kind of, I guess, I don't know, zeitgeist is the right word, that feel around campus changes even within a year. So I'd say consultation throughout. Sometimes it's better to have a bit of an idea before you bring it to you guys, because if you bring an idea that's not fully fledged, sometimes people go, hang on, this is too much responsibility. But I think you guys are keen, student media are keen. You might as well get them in, even for just a half an hour chat. And it means running the events is so much easier on both sides as well.
Yeah, and Dan, from a student media side, when you were back at Demon running those events, what would you want to know from the SU in the build-up to the event?
I think in terms of what we'd want to know from the start is essentially what they want the event to look like, what they want it to be. It's really hard to, because I think, like, taking a step back, it's understanding that what the students union are offering and what the student media are offering are 2 very different things. They work hand in hand, but they are, like, in purpose, they're unique. It's essentially with the SU deciding, like, okay, here's what we want the event to be, here's what we think it would want it to look like, here's what we're trying to achieve with it. That's when student media can go away on their own and have a think about, all right, cool, this is what they want to achieve, how can we help make that happen? And it's from the get-go being really open, sharing everything. And ultimately, I think what student media needs to know is what's the aim? What are you trying to deliver here? Because then they can take that and use their expertise and their unique skills to help make your event even better.
Absolutely. And without delving into too much technical specifics, Seb, would you have anything to add from the point of view of sort of the LSTV approach?
I think that, I mean, everything that's already been said is yes, wonderful. I think something to add potentially when you're sort of thinking about tech, and it's a small thing and it might be obvious, in case it's not, walking around the space with your SU's technical team and the technical people from the student media is the most important thing you can do. Not only does that mean that everyone sort of does make sure that everyone's got the same image in their head, because it's all very well imagining a space, but sometimes you get down to it and you've actually remembered it wrong, even though you walk through it 20 times a day. But also it means that when you get to the actual event as well, then you know where everyone's going to be, and it's just, and you know who all the technical people are and that sort of thing. So yeah, getting into spaces in the build-up is a good idea. And I think it's like different events need different amounts of sort of creative freedom, and sometimes it's nice as a sort of student media person to have creative freedom. So just be given a very simple brief. So for our at Leeds for the student exec election this year, we were essentially just told the Constitution of the Union says that there needs to be some forum for questions to be put to candidates, and that was as open as a brief really that you can get for that sort of thing. And we sort of made a game show out of that. It was quite fun. But then also knowing that if you actually don't come up with anything, then there is a backup that the SU have got up their sleeve, that they can say, oh, all right, then we'll just do what we've done for the past 10 years. But if you can come up with something good that's actually engaging, that's great.
Yeah, and obviously
Leeds won't mind me saying that.
If you do have any more technical questions, I'm sure, I think Seb is free to go to the coffee shop afterwards, so you can ask him those there. But for now, so we've planned the event, and you're there on the day. There are two main questions I've got for this one. The first one is communications, right? So if you've got student media, traditionally their role is in covering the event. How would you then communicate with them? Obviously, you might not want them the same comm system as your SU staff who are carrying out the event. But how do you find that balance between making sure that communication doesn't break down, but at the same time making sure that there's not overcrowding as well? I know, what would you approach?
So throughout the year, I realised actually, okay, who are my key people here? It might be the station manager, it might be the music director, and just identifying those students who are in those key roles for that event in that committee, in that student media committee, which is sometimes quite hard to do. So what I ended up doing by the end is just simply asking them, right, who is in charge here? You get a radio, and that radio is connected to everybody else who's on the event staff, because by the end of the year I realised actually the student media is just a key part of the event as the staff that are running it too. It's a team approach, so why not be on the same comms? The great thing about using radios too, as I'm sure you all know, there's different channels, so if you want to kind of flick onto one and be like, right, okay, your channel is channel 2, don't go onto channel 1, that's for security, they'll get a bit annoyed at you. Channel 3, we'll all talk. If you need to reach me, whatever time, just buzz me, whatever. So yeah, radios is a simple answer to that, and I learned that the hard way, I think. But just having 2 or 3 people on student media on a radio is a lifesaver, for sure.
Dan, what would you have to say to that in terms of Leicester's approach? Would you differ at all?
I'd say it's pretty much like bang on. You need to know who your main contact is, because information flowing all over the place is just gonna everything's gonna get lost, and B, you're gonna annoy a lot of people who are hearing things they don't need to hear. I think, like, for me, if I'm working on tech, for example, on the student election, I don't need to know, for example, when the SU aren't able to find one of the candidates. That's not important to me, and it's probably going to distract me from what I'm actually trying to do. But there might be things where they're like, oh, okay, equipment's just arrived, where I do need to know about it. So having the radio, having separate channels, that's really, really good, because there can be different channels for different things. Like student media can be on one channel, SU, like event ops can be on another channel, security can be on another, and you can separate it like that. But having a point of contact, of having one person from both teams that are responsible for passing information that's necessary between each other, means that you've not got free flowing information all over the place. And when these kind of events are happening, whatever information flow you think is going to happen, triple it, quadruple it. There's so much going around all the time that you need to make sure that there is communication happening, but it's happening in a very specific, very well-defined way.
Absolutely. I'll move on to my second question on this topic of on-the-day things. And it's one that happens with every big event, is stress. Seb, what would you say the key elements are to avoiding stress at an event like this, where you've got loads of different people trying to do their own thing? Obviously, student media might be trying to cover the event. You've got SU staff trying to actually make sure the event itself runs well. And then obviously you've got people actually watching the event live, potentially getting in the way as well. How would you make sure you manage all of that and avoid that stress that comes with it?
Set boundaries. No, make sure that everybody knows what they're meant to be doing. And I think generally people in student media and SUs are all generally like nice people. Nobody's going to deliberately tread on anyone's toes, but most stress comes from when people tread on toes. I think also honestly double check that everyone on your SU's team is in the mindset that everyone in student media knows what they're doing. Even if they don't, there's nothing worse than as somebody who's coordinating something with a student media group at an SU event, or sort of trying to sort of co-running an SU event. There's nothing worse than someone after the event saying, this SU person told me I couldn't do my job and then messed it up anyway. You know, that's an awful situation to be put in. So make sure that nobody, make sure that sort of everyone believes in students and has faith in students and trusts students.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that central issue of trust again. Dan, would you have anything to add on that?
I'd pretty much say the same thing in different words. Honestly, it's, as an organizer, the number one top thing you have to understand is you cannot do it all on your own. It isn't a one-person show. It is a team thing. So don't, as soon as you find yourself trying to tell other people how to do their jobs or micromanaging people, you've got into a bad place. That's when you need to take a step back and start to trust that the people that you've got involved in this, they know what they're doing because you've told them what they're doing. It's making sure that everyone who's involved is briefed properly and knows what they're meant to be doing at any given time. And it's also that understanding of that if anything goes wrong, it's very, very rarely the end of the world. There is no point sat there stressing for hours on end, if anything, just in case the tiniest minute thing goes wrong, because it doesn't matter. I don't think I've ever been to or organised any event where every single thing has been perfectly, because it doesn't happen. You don't expect it to go perfectly, and if it does, then they've not gone perfectly. They've just escaped your notice.
Absolutely. I think you've led perfectly into my last question, possibly for Hannah, before just to bounce off, which is, so obviously in the debrief of an event, you might find that things have gone wrong, but obviously the easy way out is to say, we won't work with student media again. What do you find is the most effective way of keeping that relationship going and sort of improving on those, ironing out those wrinkles, basically?
Yeah, well, just asking, really, which I feel like is a key theme to all my answers, but communication always solves everything. Just going through step by step if something did happen, if there was a breakdown in communication. Sometimes it's not between the SU and student media, but actually something went wrong within student media that night that caused, I don't know, a problem. Or sometimes it's a power cut in the venue that means your event has to start 15 minutes later, which is completely fine. That's completely out of anyone's hands. So just going through it, and it happens. But I fully believe that if you don't have them involved in the first place, then it would be a much worse event overall anyway. Going back to kind of the last point on how you deal with stress and things, I always say as an event organizer, I should be bored at an event. It should all be fine. Everything should be out of my hands. I should just be walking around, making sure everyone's okay, maybe giving a couple of people some beers. It's good. It's all fine. And just making sure that you give student media the time they need to get in and set up. Because I didn't realise actually not being that much involved with TV, doing a bit of presenting, but not much of the technical stuff when I was at uni. Student TV needs a lot of time set up, sometimes a whole day, and just giving them that space relieves a lot of stress. So.
Well, I think that is a fantastic place to leave this chat. But we'll head over to the coffee shop on table 1 now. Jamie's very kindly just put the link in the chat, and Seb can potentially talk about how Leeds have done online events during lockdown, and we can talk more about technical details if you've got any more questions for us. But yeah, we'll see you there.